welcome in today's SU session. So today's session is exploring Sitecore MongoDB in some more details. So as part of our last Mongo session, as part of our last SUG, we have gone through some of the basic concepts of MongoDB with Sitecore, like what are the different principles we use there, what is all about scaling, which includes horizontal scaling, vertical scaling. Then we also spend some time on going through the different deployment options we have, and we also talked about like why exactly Sitecore introduced MongoDB as part of their ecosystem starting at 7.5. So as part of today's knowledge share, we'll just extend MongoDB in some more details. And today basically we are going to cover about introduction to context. So we'll go over like what exactly context is in MongoDB with Sitecore, and how basically we can identify contexts in Mongo, right? And basically it's all about identifiers. Then we'll also go over understanding facets. So facets, and then how we can actually create custom facets for some of our custom applications. Then we'll also check how we can actually query MongoDB data, which is like out of the box context data, how we can fetch it using Mongo shell. And we'll also see, like, because right now with Sitecore, like there is by default four different collections that comes by default as part of the Sitecore installation. But we can also extend MongoDB to create our own collection based on our some specific requirements. So we'll also go like how you can create your own custom MongoDB collection and how you can basically add records to that. So when I say add records to that, it's all about um, adding documents to it, right? And documents can be it's basically a JSON format. It's not very structured. You can add as many records to it, and if one record can have like only two fields, one record can have like hierarchy of fields. So it's unstructured. So I think we have already gone through in as part of our session one. So let's start with the context. So basically in Sitecore XDB, like as an user, like if I'm trying to visit any application, I'm a contact for in terms of XDB, right? So as an individual visitor, I'm a contact for an application. So if I'm trying to access any application, say xyz.com, so no matter what, if I'm an authorized user or if I'm an anonymous user, in XDB, I will have an contact created for me, right? So it doesn't matter that the user always has to be user always has to be authenticated before the profile slash contact gets created in XDB. No matter what, and an anonymous user also will have a contact created in XDB. So that's why it's mentioned there. A visitor may be anonymous or he may have been authenticated. So it's both ways. A user can be authenticated or it can be anonymous. Second thing is for context is a context is basically a combination of facets, right? So basically facets is something we are going to cover more in coming slides. But a combination of facets are nothing but you can consider facets as like a properties of your tables, right? So basically you have a collection, right? And basically you have an contact, and for every contact we so by default from Sitecore, there are few phases that's already inbuilt as part of the contact, right? So which includes like identifiers, personal information, email, phone number, addresses. So these are few properties slash phases which comes by default. But maybe based on your requirement, based on specific business rule, it's required that for every contact we may need to add some more fields over there, right? So that's something definitely possible. We can extend. So and how we can basically extend the contact by means of facets. So facet is something like it's a property of a contact which we can use to extend our contact and to add more fields and more values to that. We'll cover more into that, but in a nutshell, contact is basically a combination of facets, and for every contact, if you see, we'll have identifiers, personal information, email, phone number, and addresses. One more thing we just have to check here is, so when we talk about identifiers, let's say if as an anonymous user I'm actually browsing some XYZ application, that's a Sitecore based application, and I'm not yet authorized, right? So basically I'm an anonymous user. So for at that point of time, still a contact will be created for that user, for that anonymous user, but there will not be any identifiers added to that, because identifier is only going to add only when the user is authenticated. But still a contact will be created which will have its own contact ID. So internally Sitecore slash Mongo uses that contact ID to check all the to check the browsing history and all other information for a contact. But identifier facet is something which will be populated and updated only when the user is authenticated. And we'll check more about it. So identifier personal information, email, phone number, addresses. So if you see this screenshot on the left hand side, basically we have different collections, right? We have automation ranges, automation states, form data, GeoIPs, in identifiers, interactions, and everything. We also have a collection called context. So if you click on this context, and we'll see how it works in RoboMongo, I can show you that. But if you click on a context, you will see like different contexts added to your Mongo, right? And for every contact in the right hand side, you see we have this unique ID, right? So this basically unique ID is something like which gets populated by default from Sitecore. Like we are not populating this ID, this unique ID. Then but Sitecore slash MongoDB will use this particular ID internally for its own purpose, right? And now we have this identifier as another facet which has an identification level and identifier. Then we have like system, test combination, personal, emails, phone numbers, right? So identifiers, personal, emails, phone number. So these are the default facet which comes by default as part of your contact. And identifier is basically an any string, like which basically differentiate a user from a different from another user, right? So identifier will cover more. We'll discuss more about identifiers, but an identifier can be anything. Let's say if when I'm trying to browse an application and there is a page which is basically asking for some information about me in the form of some forms, right? So basically they have a form given there wherein like it is expected that user has to provide some of the information. Then only they can proceed, right? So at that point of time, let's say if I'm giving my email address as a unique identification number there while filling the form, my email address will act like an identifier in Mongo, right? So that is one instance how we can use what is actually identifier. So if I'm using my email address, that email address is identifier there. There can be some scenarios wherein like even though like we are not actually explicitly giving that information from our side, but maybe there are some third-party system which is already integrated with that Sitecore application. Let's say SFDC, right? So we have that Salesforce stuff. So in Salesforce already, Salesforce has a lot of information about their existing users, right? And then from my application, if I'm just logging into the Sitecore application, right, by means of like some user ID or something, that user ID is something like we can get it from Salesforce. Or Salesforce is just an example like from where we can get the information, or it can be a SQL database also, where like we have some integrations in place like which has some user related information. So at that point of time, it doesn't matter that I have to have like an email that I have to provide only email address there. It can be a simple unique some XYZ number right there. So that at that point of time, any information which I'm getting from any unique information which I'm getting from a third-party system like Salesforce, Custom DB, or any other third-party application, that particular string will work as an identifier for me in contact. Plus there can be other instances also like which basically acts like an identifier in Mongo. Then coming to next facet here, that is a personal information. This is also a default facet that comes by default. So here we have like first name, surname, nickname, birth date, and gender. So these all are the default facets which comes by default as part of personal information, right? And we can update it, set it, we can do anything over there. So then we have email, that is again another default facets as part of the application. Then we have phone numbers, right? So this is what we have like as part of the default facets from context. So the next thing is like how basically we can identify contacts in MongoDB, and we can only identify contacts in MongoDB by means of identifiers. So if we check for the identifying contact, so as I mentioned before, we can go over this again, but as I mentioned before, like what is identifier? Identifier is any string value which makes one user different from another user, right? Basically a means of like a unique identification key there. right? So it can be an email address. If you see in the last line of this, identifiers can be one of the following. It can be a user login, it can be a user ID from the third party system, or it can be an email address, right? Now if you go for the to point one, it says is contact information in the process of connecting to the current session device and contact information to an identifier. So based on that identifier, we are basically connecting to the current session, and that is all happened using Sitecore.analytics.tracker current session identity method. As an parameter, we have to pass a valid identifier, which can be one of these. A contact is a contact is always identified by an identifier. So there is no way we can identify a contact without any identifier. So an identifier has to be there. Otherwise, that contact is still. So if there is no identifier we have for any specific contact, still we have a contact for it, but that is an unidentified contact now, because there is no identity added for that contact. Still a contact is there, but that is an unidentified contact. A contact is always identified by an identifier. Identifier is a string value which uniquely identifies a contact in relation to the website, and this value is always provided by the contact himself, right? So this is something actually, as a website user, we provide always, right? So if we are filling the form which has email address form, which has information on like providing email address details, so as a user we are providing it. If we have some information on Salesforce or any other third party system, any SQL DB, that's where that is also something we only provide. It's not like someone else has added on our behalf, right? So everything which as an user we have provided as a unique identification number for us, that acts like an identifier in Mongo. So this is just a small snippet like how basically we can identify a contact in Mongo. So it all comes from tracker.current.session.identity and unique identifier. It can be one of these, like what we discussed. And then let's say if the identity of that contact is identified, like the contact is valid contact, it's not an unidentified contact, then if you try to access the identifiers.identifier, then we'll get all the related details from that, right? So let's say if you're trying to identify a contact if you're trying to identify a contact which is not there in our in our Mongo, that's not a valid, that's an unidentified contact. But if a contact is valid, and then we are trying to access like analytics.tracker current.contact.identifiers.identifier, then basically this is something like we will get information about that identifier. Next is so far any questions on contacts?
No, Ankit. No.
Okay, great. So the next thing is understanding facets, right? So I've already given you a high level overview on what exactly facets are. So facets are nothing but a property of your contact, right? So contact facet is a property of your contact. Facets, by means of facets only, we can either write the information in our Mongo, or we can read the information back from Mongo, right? So facets are a mean to get the information from Mongo or to write the information to Mongo. Facets are used to read and write information to your specific contact. Out of the box contact facets that comes by default is personal address, emails, phone number, picture, communication profile, and preferences. So these are the 7 phases that come by default with Sitecore installation. But as and when, like as I mentioned, if there is a need, like we have to extend our contact and we need to add some more details to our existing profile. Let's say if we want to add some information about their like browsing history, or if you want to add some information about their hobbies, or or like or anything specific, their unique identification number, something like that, we can actually extend our Mongo there, and we can extend it by means of custom facets. We can actually create custom facets, and we can actually integrate it on top of our Mongo profile. So then what happens is, like, we will have all this information: personal address, emails, phone number, picture, communication profile, and preferences. Plus, if there is any custom facets added for any profile, that information will also get added to that card from Mongo card. One thing I just want to mention here is, it's not so, if I mentioned that personal addresses, emails, phone numbers, pictures, so these are the 7 facets which is there by default. You don't have to create it. As an user, as a developer, we don't have to create it, right? But it doesn't mean that even though this is there by default, but if there is no information added to any of these facets, it's not going to come in your contact card, right? So the thing is, like, basic the rule is this facets can be used only, this facet will be visible for reading the information only when you have added some information back to it, right? So if because if you see the normal the SQL table, right? Let's assume like you have 7 different fields added to it, and you have actually all are optional, right? And you have added values to like couple of fields only. But still, if you see the structure of your that row, still you will see all the fields. But in this case, if there is no field, if, in case of Mongo, let's assume like you have some info, like you have something added for personal, right? You have added your first name, you have added your last name and your nickname and some few other things, and if you have added your address also, right, zip code and all that thing, but you have not added your phone number, you have not updated your profile pic, you have not updated your emails, then for the same profile card you're not going to see any information about emails, phone numbers and picture, right? So the rule is you have to have some information, then only it will come. The only thing which comes by default is that you don't have to create a new facet which can hold that information. That functionality is all in place. You just have to write that information back to your card. Same way for custom facets also. So in this case, if you see, let's say we have a contact one and we have contact two. Contact one has all different information, personal address, emails, and all these 7 information. But contact two has actually provided only information about picture, personal, and address. There is no details on emails and phone number. There itself, in if you review your Mongo data from any like reviewer, like you can use Mongo or some other tools. There, if you see, you'll see the visible differences. Like for one contact card, you will see all these different facets added to a contact card, but for the other contact, you will see only personal information and picture and phone number, whatever he has added. So that's what it makes a difference. But the thing is, you don't have to write something that by which like you can actually add this information, emails or phone numbers, and this is all there for you by default. You just have to write it. Next is so we discussed about facets, right? So by default we have 7 different facets which comes by default. We can just write the information back to it. So custom facet information, if you go to this path, your app config include sitecore.analytics.model.config. This is where you will find the default facets, right? So default facet, it will always have a name and the contact information, right? So this is all the interfaces which we have there. Comes under which assembly. So if let's say if you are planning to extend our contact card to hold some more information, we definitely have to have some custom logic in there. We have to write some interfaces, some class implementation, and then we have to update, or we have to basically deploy that custom facets right here, right? And that, just to make sure like our Sitecore files are always clean, we can just make use of Sitecore patch there. I will discuss more about it. Okay, so before we discuss about querying Mongo, so I just want to show you like how basically we can create data in Mongo. So before that, let me show you. So this is what my Robo Mongo. This is useful to validate all your information, like whatever information you are writing in your Mongo, is it all coming properly or not. So this is what I have created, like some sample Mongo database. So we have a SUG Sandbox Analytics, which has all these different collections added to it. So context is one of them, right? And under contact, if you see, we have like different contacts added to that, right? So if you extend this contact, right, we don't have anything else. Like we are not seeing the identifiers here, because when actually I visited this application, like there was no authentication added to that, right? It was just an anonymous browsing. But if you see some other users, let's say here, maybe we have some personal information added to that, and maybe let me check. So basically this is an identifier, right? So an identifier can be a single string, it can be an email address, or it can be like a unique GUID, which is you're getting from some third-party systems. So it can be one of them. And as of now, we just have the personal information added to that. Like we have first name, we have the surname added to that, and we have just the nickname added. So let us take an example. Like if you want to create a new contact in your Mongo, how basically you can do that, right? So for that, I have I have already implemented this, so I just want to show you, right? So basically for everything we need to have a unique identifier. So I'm just taking an example, like my unique identifier is demo@gmail.com, right? So this is what I'm just giving. This is what I'm just giving as an unique identifier here. And then using tracker or current.session to identify, I'm just identifying this contact in Mongo. And then what I'm doing is, let me just create a web demo user1, right? Oh, first name, right? Where last name equals to, let me just make it user, and where surname equals to demo user1 again, right? And then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to call an interface or a facet for, which basically holds the method to set the information for your personal details, right? So we have a interface called iContactPersonInfo. So what we can do is we where personal data facet equals to tracker dot current dot contact dot. So basically here I'm just trying to read that facet information. So we have I contact. So these are the different facets which comes by default. Let me just go to iContactPersonInfo, right? And what is the name of your facet? So in our case, if you see RoboMongo again, our, if you see this thing, and let's go to any field. So this is our facet, right? This is personal. So we just have to provide the same facet information there. So we are just typing, let me just type personal. Okay. So we have this personal information there now. What I'm going to do is, I'm just going to set the values. First name equals to first name. Okay. Right. Then we have personal information dot surname equals to surname, and then personal information dot nickname. Nickname is nothing but I can just use this. Okay, last name, let me give, I just make it nickname here. This is what I can give a surname here. So we have surname, and then we have nickname here, right? So now till this point, like we have we have the information about that contact. We have updated everything on first name, surname, and nickname field, and then we just have to push this information back to Mongo, right? Now what I'm going to do is, let me just copy this. Just give me a second. Now if we go back to Mongo, let's refresh collections, contacts. See, we have this demo user1 user and demo user1. So whatever information we have added there, it's all got updated and get updated here. And identifier we have added as an email address at demo@gmail.com. So this is how actually you can add information to your Mongo. Next thing is so we'll just talk a little about the adding custom facets. So we already have that thing in place. I just want to show you how we can do it. So whenever you want to extend your when your contact and you want to add some more fields to that, right? Some more facets if you want to add. Basically, there are a few things involved. We need to have an interface which basically tells that what type of information you are going to bind there, you're trying to store. The second thing is we need to have a class implementation which will implement all the different methods of your whatever things you have in interface, and then we need to have we basically have to decide on our facet name, right? So in this case, if you see, I have already added this information here. So in this case, what I have done is we have an I use the data interface which has only one facet added to that, education, right? Now if you go to the implementation of it, we have a class. Yeah, so if you'll go back to user of data interface, it is actually implementing iFacet interface. Let's go to the implementing class. We have this user data which inherits facet and then implements I use the data interface here. And then this is where basically we are actually defining our facet name, but basically what exactly facet we are looking for, right? So in this case, I'm actually trying to create a new facet called education. So that's what we have defined a name as facet education. Then we on the constructor, we are just in. So in Mongo, basically ensure attribute, get attribute, set attribute is nothing but like ensure attribute is nothing but like you're just declaring your variable there. Get attribute is just like get, and set attribute is just like set. So in this constructor, if you see, we are just making sure like we have this variable declared ensure attribute of type string and this education here. Next is we have this I user data education. So we are just implementing get set properties we have here. We are just trying to get it. Facet education, this we are getting set. We are just trying to update it, well, update the value. So wherever we will try to set this education from the front end, this will be called and this will set it to this particular facet. So once the interface and the implementation is all done, the next step will be to basically deploy your facet into Sitecore, right? So how you can basically deploy your facet is, as I'm already shown you this thing, right? So we have sitecore.analytics.model.config. So one option is like either you can add this information directly to this file, or if you don't want to add this information back to this file, you can actually create your patch for whatever changes you made and then directly deploy that patch. So in this case, we have that patch available, right? What I have done is we've added an element and all these interfaces we have added here. So basically there's an interface field which has the details about interface, and then we have implementation, and then we have a facet which wherein I have defined the name of interface here, name of your facet, education, and then all the information. Okay, so I'm not going to more detail about this custom facet, but I have already I think we have already added some details to this facet. So let me just refresh this thing so that I can show you how you can add these details back to here. Yeah, so here this is something we have identifiers, we have person information. So we have this identifier added to this, we have person information added here, and then we have an education also. Right, so we have this education, and here education I have added literature here. So but this, like, you can actually add, you can also create like a list of your educations, or if you want to have just one single line text field, that also you can do. It's basically up to the implementation team who it's and basically the it depends on the requirement of that. So that's all about custom facets. Let's move forward with querying MongoDB. So we discussed like we have like by default MongoDB has some information. It has personal data information and email and all that stuff, right? So Mongo query. So there are few things which actually you can use directly in. So there are basically two tools which you can use. Either you can go directly to a Mongo shell from command line, or you can actually make use of your Mongo to filter your data. So in this case, if you see what we are trying to do is we're trying to get the collection. So this is the default syntax. To get collection is nothing but basically it will get the collection for you. It can be a contact, or it can be your GUIP, it can be form data, or it can be identifiers, it can be a custom collection as well. So db.getCollection contacts means we are trying to get contacts here, and then we are trying to filter it using .find, and a filter query is like get me all the records where person.first name is set to Ankit Joshi, right? So this is what we have to use. So if we execute this query here indirectly in the RoboMongo, this is what we get, right? I can show you directly on RoboMongo. Another query is db.get collection of identifiers. So here we are trying to get identifiers collection and then trying to add a filter on ID which has Ankit on it. If you'll go back to RoboMongo, I can just quickly show you. So let me just refresh this once again. It's not required, but simply I'm doing. Let me just close all stuff. Right. So we have this one. Now here, if you see, we have this query window for you. So we have db.get collection of contacts because currently our context is contacts, and then .find. So as of now there is no filters added to it. That's why it is showing you all of the stuff. But just in case if you want to add some more filters to it, so that because right now we have only 9 records, right? But sometimes depending on the like basically it depends on the implementation and if you have like more data, if your website has of more like frequent visits and you have some subscriptions added to that, so you will definitely get some more visits to that, right? So that at that point of time you'll find lakhs of records and millions of records will be there. So at that point of time it's not possible like to like individually look for the data which you're looking for. There is an option, there is a pagination added to here which you can make use of it, but again that's something you cannot use when you're talking about millions of records. So in that case what you can use is you can use db.get collection of your collection whatever it is .find and add your filter here. So in this case what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, so this is the same thing which I have added in the ppt. I'm just putting it here as well. So I'm just trying, so let me see here, personal, right? So let's filter this record. So we have personal information whose first name is demo user 1, right? So let's try to put personal dot first name, right? First name is demo user 1, and once your query is all in place you just need to execute it. So once you execute it, this is what you'll get. So basically if your data has some more information, like if your filtered query is returning more than one record, all those different records you can see it here. And this is what the same record which you were talking about. Same way you can also filter your identifier. So identifier is nothing but so far whatever records we have added, right? So all the identifiers information will get added to collection called identifier. And if you expand any specific identifiers here, so this will have its own ID. So this ID is nothing but the identifier which you have added. Contact, your contact information, like what was the by which contact this identifier got created and when got updated. So if you want to filter your identifiers also, you can filter your identifiers also. So and basically you can just make use of got identifiers .find. Based on ID you can do it, or based on contact also you can do it. So that's how you can actually use Mongo query. Creating custom MongoDB. So custom Mongo. So far we just discussed about how you can actually make use of your existing collection, right? How you can use your contact, how you can extend your contact, how you can use identifiers to get the information, how you can filter it. But there are definitely certain scenarios wherein like you have to think about adding some more collections to it that may or may not related to your contacts, but that can be something different, right? Because in every application if you see there are certain features wherein like we have to use wherein like we have to use some custom we have to use some custom DB, right? So that's something like it's not 100 like always always the case, but just in case if there is a requirement in your application wherein like you have to handle something in a different way using custom DB approach, you can either make use of SQL or you can make use of Mongo as well. SQL is sometimes helpful because nowadays all the Sitecore applications are being migrated to Azure, which has a very stable backup plan. But in Mongo, we don't have that stable backup plan. So when in Azure, like basically we have a backup every second, but in Mongo you cannot get a backup of Mongo data every second. Maybe you can just get it every 2 seconds. 24 hours, but definitely the stability of your data is more secure in SQL rather than in MongoDB. But again, it depends on your requirement. If you feel that, because if you are migrating something to Azure, there is a cost associated with it. But in Mongo, that's not the case, right? Because if your data, if your the intensity of your data is not that critical, and so in that case, what I recommend is, instead of going for custom DB in SQL, you can make use of Mongo. You can basically have all this information added to your Mongo. So custom Mongo, yeah. So in order to create a custom MongoDB, we can make use of Mongo shell, right? So I'll just show you how that works. So we just have to go to Mongo shell, and then there is an advantage in RoboMongo. In basically, there is an advantage in Mongo, right? In Mongo shell, whenever you're typing your Mongo, your database name, if that database is there, right, it will automatically change the context to the database. If that database is not yet created in your Mongo, it will create the database for you. So it's not like there is no separate command to like create a database and then add records to that. There is nothing like that. So if the database is not there, it will create it. If database is there, it's well and good. It will automatically switch the context to the whatever context you are trying to switch. So the same thing I'm trying to explain here is, if MyDB, so in this case, use MyDB, right? MyDB is the custom DB which I am trying to create. If MyDB exists, it will switch the context to MyDB. If it exists, it will directly switch it. If not, it creates the DB. It just creates a MyDB there. Then once the DB is created, and if you just give your command DB, then it will tell you like what is your current context. And then if your current context is not MyDB, then using command use MyDB, you can basically set the context automatically for that. Then use DB command to check your context DB, check if the DB is created or not, using show DB command. So let me just show you briefly how you can make use of Mongo shell here. So here basically what we have to do is we have to actually execute Mongo shell, right? So for that, basically you have to go to your directory where exactly you have installed your MongoDB, right? And then you just change your port if required, right? If there is just one installation of your Mongo in your instance, then you don't have to worry about anything. By default, it will point to that specific port, only default port. Now let's take an example of so this is what I did, right? So show DBs. So basically it gives the list of all DBs which we have in your Mongo in that particular instance, right? Because right now I'm talking about 27019 port. It will basically give you information about all different ports database added to that. So let me just do it again. Show DBs, right? So it's again giving me the same set of information. Now let me go back to row Mongo again, and if you can observe, we don't have anything added like custom here, right? We don't have any custom database added. So what I'm going to do is I'm trying to create a new collection from Mongo shell, and let's add some details to that. So how we can do it? Right. So what I'm going to do is use, and then let me create a database like SUG underscore custom DB, right? So if you see here in my Mongo, there is nothing like SUG underscore custom DB, right? But if you see here, I've just given command called use SUG underscore custom DB. So let's execute this and see what happens. So now if you see, switch to DB SUG underscore custom DB, it means by default it's your context DB is not set to SUG underscore custom DB. Now another thing to note is, let's verify it if it's there or not. Still it is not there, right? It's not there. It's not coming here. So let's go back to our Mongo shell and try to see how many DBs we have here. Show DBs, right? So still it is not showing you your just recently created DB SUG underscore custom DB, right? So whenever we create a custom DB in Mongo, it is required that we need to have at least one document added to it. So unless and until we have at least one document added to any MongoDB, it won't show up in any of your tool, or either in your row Mongo or in your Mongo shell itself, right? So in this case, if you want to see that particular MongoDB added to your row Mongo, what we have to do is we just have to add one test data to it. So how we can do it? let me just see what is our context. So our context is still SUG underscore custom DB. From here, what I can do is I can execute DB dot because my current context is a custom DB. I am into custom DB now. So DB dot DB command basically represent my custom DB. So now here what I'm trying to do is DB dot let me create employees dot insert. So here what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to add a table called employees and insert few records to it. So let me just add let me add name name SUG user, right? SUG user, and then let me add some employee let's give some ID, a class, anything, primary something. Okay, so in this case what I'm trying to do is db.employees.insert name I have given for that employee, and then I have also added a class to it. If you execute this, so it says right result is 1 inserted, right? If you'll go back to, okay, before we go back to RoboMongo, let's see here itself. So show dbs. So now we have this SUG underscore custom DB added to it, right? And now if you go back to our RoboMongo here, refresh it, you'll see we have SUG underscore custom DB added to that. If you expand it, go to your collection. So we have added a table called employees, expand it, and you can see all this information. Name is SUG user, classes your primary. At the same time, let's say if you want to add more records to it, right? You want to add like an array of your employees. So what we can do is db dot employees, right, dot insert. Okay, and then let's do this, and then let's add name user1 comma class a second, class colon secondary. Okay, now what I'll do is name user2, and then class let's give it again primary or anything. Okay, so here what I have done is db.employee.insert name user1, class is secondary. Same way I have added another record to that whose name is user2, class is primary, right? So if you do like this and execute it, and see, if you see the result here, inserted is 2. Now if we go back to your go back to our SUG custom DB, go to employees. Now we have 3 different records added to that, right? So we have name called user1, class is primary and secondary, and then we have a name and class called secondary. So this is a way where like we can make use of custom DB, because I have seen like several applications which makes use of custom DB as much as possible, right? Because if we talk about locations, right? So location is something, there are different ways of handling the proximity search, right? So we can actually directly do it from your site code. We can store all the information back to your site code. We can have all the location related information loaded in your site code instance. But there are certain scenarios wherein like we also have to think about the performance, right? So if you're talking about like several millions of locations or millions of employees or something like that, instead of storing that information back to your site code, we can add that information in your Mongo, right? Because in Mongo we have a inbuilt because that is just one example I'm giving you, like wherein like we may have to think about Mongo. We have a proximity search which is there by default in Mongo, right? Proximity search is there, which basically tells you like which particular location is near to you and all that stuff. So if you have something like that, you can definitely you can basically you have to basically understand the structure, understanding the implementation and all that stuff, and if it makes sense to you, maybe you can definitely think about adding all the location related information back to your Mongo, and then make use of that proximity search which is there by default as part of the implementation. So, and that is just one instance. Maybe there are certain other examples also which you can think of, like what you can do is implemented in your current application, which you think that it can be migrated back to your Mongo. Let's go back to this one, and I just want to give you one, like explain you one more thing here. So if you see here, there is one database which we have here, testing underscore Mongo. So basically we can, it's all about your command. So if you just want to remove this data, remove this table itself, use testing underscore Mongo. So now it's, and now what we can do is we can just execute command called db dot drop database. So database, right? So now this is dropped. It means if you just refresh it, instead of refreshing, show dbs. So we don't have that database here. If we go back to RoboMongo, it's removed from here as well. Let's go back and then adding documents. So this is what I discussed, like we can actually add more information to our in the form of documents to your Mongo, and it can be unstructured. You don't have to follow a very like specific structure that it has to be in this format. Your different contacts can have different schemas added to that. So we don't have to worry about anything that it has to follow exact structure for all your contacts. If your contact one has different with other contact with in some of the definitions, you can unstructure your contacts data. And same thing for if you are trying to add your collections also differently. If you have some collections, custom collections basically, that also you can make use of. And then yeah, I think I'm done with that. If you have any questions, you can ask, or you can just reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And just to add a note that I'm also planning to publish some of the articles on Mongo in the form of some series. So maybe you just I can share with you, and if you just, in case if you have some time, you can just review those and just get back to me on if you have any feedback on that. Okay, I think I'm good. If anyone has any questions.
All right, I guess there are no questions at this time. And thanks, Ankit, for your presentation. I'll be sharing the resources shortly. And if anyone has any questions, they can probably reach out to you in all these channels available.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Yeah.